There's a curious duality that at the start of the country, when the Constitution was first written, slaves in the South were counted as 3/5 of a person in the United States Census. So even though they couldn't vote and they were technically somebody else's property, these slaves were counted in the census, and congressional apportionment was based on counting them as 3/5 of a person. And in all, 12.6% of the United States population were slaves. So that 12.5% got reduced by 40%, and that amount was then incorporated into the population base in deciding how many congressmen each state would have. And since it determined the number of congressmen, it also determined the number of electoral votes, which is the House plus the 2 senators from each state. So from the very beginning, slavery was used to pad the representation of the South and give it more representation than it deserved in the Union. And this was one of the basic compromises that was necessary to set up the Constitution. And it, by the way, helped elect Thomas Jefferson, who without that provision would probably have lost to Adams in 1800 when Adams ran for a second term. The whole idea that you use people that can't vote as 3/5 of a person to pad the election results, or to pad the Electoral College and the Congress, was disgraceful and embodied in the Constitution until slavery was outlawed. But something remains in the Constitution, which is that it says that the census shall be of all inhabitants of the United States. Not citizens, not legal people, but every inhabitant of the United States. And right now the estimate is that 7% of the population of the United States are immigrants, whether here legally or not, who are not registered voters, not citizens, and can't vote. But even though they can't vote, they're counted in the census. So in colonial times, or post-colonial times, in the pre-Civil War period, 12.5% of the population was counted as voters when they shouldn't have been, and now 7% is when they shouldn't have been. And it pads the representation of states like California, Texas, Florida, and others where large numbers of immigrants are. For example, in California, which is 10% of the country's population, it gets 12.5% of the country's electoral votes and congressional delegation because of the number of immigrants who are padding that voting total. Now, this has topical relevance now because the Trump administration wants to include a question on the census that asks whether people are citizens or not. And the left is raising hell about that and suing about it, claiming that it will have a chilling effect on response to the census, and that people will not be willing to complete the census form if they're asked whether they're citizens or not, worried that they'll be used as the basis for deportations in the future, and that therefore people won't be willing to say it. And at stake is the overrepresentation of the Northeast, not the Northeast, of the I was going to say of the slave states, of the heavily immigrant states, as a result of the large immigrant population. Now, we can't do anything about that. Inhabitants is in the Constitution and not likely to change it. But we should realize that our system of electoral votes and of congressional delegation is distorted by the same level and kind of unfairness as the slavery provision was prior to 1860. Thanks for watching. We're confronting a first in our politics, a woman who is running for president, whose political career was launched and would not have been launched were it not for an affair that she had with a prominent older man. Kamala Harris had an affair with Willie Brown, 40 years older than she, in the early 1990s. Brown was the Speaker of the California State Assembly and went on to become the mayor of San Francisco, and was known throughout his career as the boss of San Francisco, the key person in deciding who got ahead and who didn't. And for several years, he was romantically and publicly linked to Kamala Harris. At the start of their relationship and her career, when she was still in her late 20s, had just become an attorney, she had a job as an assistant district attorney at the Alameda County DA's office. But it didn't pay much, and while she had that job, Brown appointed her to a prestigious position on the California Unemployment Insurance Board and also on the Medical Assistance Commission, both lucrative jobs paying a fair amount of money. Then when Kamala switched jobs and worked in the San Francisco District Attorney Office, after 2 years she decided to run against her boss. She had just turned 39. And her boss was a two-term incumbent in his 60s who was very powerful and unlikely to be defeated. But with Willie Brown's intervention, his fundraising, his endorsement, and his help, she was able to overcome him and get her first major job as the district attorney of San Francisco. Brown was asked about his role in her career, and he said, "Yes, I may have influenced her career by appointing her to 2 state commissions when I was Assembly Speaker. I certainly helped her with her first race for district attorney in San Francisco. But I've also helped the careers of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Governor Gavin Newsom, Senator Dianne Feinstein, and a host of other politicians. He helps all the girls." But this is a potentially serious issue, and should we take at face value the accomplishments and resume of a person who basically helped get her position through ways that we would not consider to be above board, or at least reputable politically. And Harris went from good fortune to good fortune. She went from DA in San Francisco, very close election, she narrowly won, toppling the incumbent. 4 years later, she was routinely reelected. And then she ran for Attorney General in California, normally a very important and very difficult race. But in that year, Jerry Brown had returned from retirement and was running for governor against Meg Whitman. And everybody was focused on that race. Nobody paid any attention to any of the down-ballot races. And that included the race for Attorney General. And because of that, and because of the massive support that Brown was able to give her, she was effective, she won, and she was elected Attorney General, re-elected easily 4 years later. Then she ran for the U.S. Senate seat. And under California's rules, all candidates run together, and the top 2 run it off, regardless of whether they're Democrat or Republican, if nobody gets a majority. And Kamala Harris was pitted against a former Congressman, Loretta Sanchez, who had no chance at all of winning. Harris spent almost $10 million, Sanchez spent $3 million, and she was just overwhelmed. And much of that money was raised with the assistance, again, of her godfather, Willie Brown. By then, the romantic relationship had been cut off, but still the political relationship survived. So Kamala Harris has advanced largely under the radar, winning a race for district attorney on the strength of her involvement with the political boss of the town, slipping in as the Attorney General in the year in which nobody was paying any attention to that race, getting elected to the Senate against a fellow Democrat, a very minor opponent. And now, after basically a cup of coffee in the Senate, 2 years, she's now running for president. On the basis of what qualifications? I've just written a new book, 50 Shades of Politics, which is unlike anything I've written before. It's a series of 100 short, 2 pages each, autobiographic essays and stories and vignettes and tales from my career in politics, my time with Clinton, my work in 40 countries around the world and in every state in the country. You can't buy it in bookstores, but you can online at Amazon.com. Thanks for watching. Over the weekend, we were all astonished, I think, to read a story about Beto O'Rourke participating in something called the Cult of the Living Cow, which is a hacking group that as a teenager at 15 years old he participated in, and would hack into other people's stuff, and would make up stories and write them and kind of be a blog. And one of the entries in this blog by Beto O'Rourke when he was 15 years old, or 16, but not an 8-year-old child, spoke about a fantasy that he had, that he was driving his car and stopped for a light, and crossing the street in front of him were two young children very happily playing. And he said, they stole my happiness. And he said, my right foot then involuntarily weighted down on the gas pedal and jammed into them. And I didn't hear anything until I heard the squeal of pain of one of the two of them as they were impaled on the hood of my car. And he talked about the feeling of euphoria that he felt as a result of that, or during that incredible fantasy. Just unbelievable, the stuff of which psychosis is made. And this man was running for the United States Senate. He was a congressman. And he was moving up and up in the polls. And a lot of people felt he would defeat Ted Cruz and become the senator from Texas. And a reporter named Joseph Menn, M-E-N-N, working for Reuters, had this story and didn't use it before the election. He claims the reason he didn't use it was that the Cult of the Living Cow group would not identify Beto as part of it. They just said a guy in public life who now was a congressman was part of it, but that they wouldn't tell him until after the election, or wouldn't let him use it until after the election. Anyway, he found out about it before the election, interviewed Beto before the election on it. Beto gave some ridiculous excuse, and he assured Beto he would not use this until after the Senate election. So we came this close to electing literally a psychopath to the United States Senate. And now we are considering seriously electing him president of the United States. He's just declared his candidacy. The outrageous fact of a candidate who does this, or a person who does this, seeking public office, and then the media being complicit in covering it up, is unbelievable. And it ranks as one of the all-time stories of media bias in our history. Thanks for watching. Donald Trump is about to sign an executive order requiring that in order to get federal funding, colleges and universities must adhere to the doctrine of free speech on campus, and that they must act against students or organizations that would intimidate, harass, obstruct, or threaten people that give speeches who have other points of view, and that free speech must reign. Now, this is a key insight and a key move on Trump's part. But it reminded me of a meeting I once had with the president and the head of the political science department at Williams College in 2004. I had just given a speech on campus, and it was right after the Bush-Kerry election. And I was having lunch at their invitation after the speech with the president of the college and the head of the political science department. And I said, by the way, how did your faculty vote in the election? And he said, oh, I hope unanimously. I said, you mean for Kerry? And he said, of course. And I said, don't you have any Republicans on the faculty? And they looked at each other and said, we hope not. And I said, you mean the political science department that encourages gender diversity, geographic diversity, ethnic diversity, religious diversity, sexual orientation diversity, does not encourage political ideological diversity? And he said, absolutely not. We're very proud that we don't. And he went through how they work hard to make sure that their faculty is liberal and left and imbues its students with that ethic as they emerge, something that they had common with universities throughout the country. And it's created this hotbed of radicalism on campuses because the students are only hearing one point of view. Now, I believe that this same principle of using federal funding to require free speech should also be used to require diversity in the faculty. That just as it is illegal to discriminate against someone because they're handicapped or because they're gay or because they're black or because they're Jewish or because they're female, it should be illegal to refuse to hire them because they're conservative or because they're liberal. That particularly in political science and government departments, it should be required that ideological diversity exists. And until such time as this can be legislated, it should be promulgated by executive orders, also tied to university funding. I'm not saying that it need be a majority of one ideology or the other, but that it must have diversity, and there must be elements of both points of view represented on campus. Thanks for watching. It looks like Beto O'Rourke is going to declare his candidacy as a Democrat for president. This after 6 years, just 3 terms in the House of Representatives, during which he has accomplished absolutely nothing. And O'Rourke himself, when he ran for Senate, failed to cite any achievements that he could credit to himself. Literally none. The only thing he did was to run for the Senate, raise a lot of money, and lose the race. And now he wants to be president and thinks that he has the judgment and maturity and integrity to vie for the office. He's running, and they're casting him as a moderate, saying that he's going to be more moderate than the field of extreme leftists who are now running. But you can't get farther left than O'Rourke. He supports Medicare for all, free tuition. He says that he wants to consider the abolition of ICE. He wants legalization of pot for all uses. And he introduced a resolution in the El Paso City Council, in which he served before going to Congress, to give serious consideration and study to legalizing all drugs, including heroin and cocaine. And he said, quote, "that may be the way we want to go," unquote. But now he's running, and his record is open to scrutiny and fair game. That record includes a criminal conviction of his family store, a furniture store in El Paso, which in 2005 was convicted, the family was in effect, of structuring payments of $630,000 so they would not get reported to the IRS. It was a furniture store, and some customer walked in and spent $630,000 over a short period of time in cash to buy furniture. And their crime, his mother's in particular, was to take the money in increments of 20 to 50,000 and then divide it into piles of less than 10,000 each and report those as separate transactions so they would not go before the IRS. They paid the taxes on it, but it was an effort to avoid disclosure. Okay, now I ask you, who pays $700,000 of cash for furniture over a period of time and then wants to hide it from the IRS? Is it an honest customer looking to redo his living room? Or is it somebody who's trying to launder money? Could it be somebody involved with drugs, somebody involved with organized crime? The family has refused to identify the customer. And because the charges are brought in El Paso, where O'Rourke's father was the political boss and presided over the whole operations of the town, including some fairly sleazy stuff, they have not been forthcoming in identifying the person, and the authorities have not required them to do so. But it gives us serious pause. O'Rourke's role in the store is that he owned the property the store was located on. And this took place when he was 25 years old. Certainly an adult and certainly accountable for his actions. The other story is one more personally about Beto O'Rourke. When he was 26 years old, not 17 or 18, but 26, 20 years ago, he was arrested for DUI. This was some DUI. He was driving at the speed limit was 75 miles an hour, and he was driving way above the speed limit according to a car that he passed. And he swerved, struck a truck, and went into the median strip and landed on the other side facing the oncoming traffic. The car that he passed pulled over and saw that O'Rourke was trying to leave the scene of the accident. And he went and blocked him so he couldn't leave the scene and waited with him until the police arrived. So he should have been charged with leaving the scene of an accident, but he was not, in part because of his father's power in the El Paso jurisdiction, and he was hit with a simple DUI, and he attended rehab facilities for a few months and never served time for it. But does the person that does this have the integrity and the maturity to be president of the United States? We're not talking about a casual DUI. We're talking about being so incapacitated, likely driving 90 or 100 miles an hour, that he literally lost control of the car, struck a truck, and flipped over the median to the other side, landing facing the oncoming traffic, and then attempted to leave the scene. Both of these episodes, the one suggesting individual immaturity and the other suggesting potentially a history of family involvement with some very unsavory elements, is something that we need to explore as we learn about Beto's candidacy for president. Thanks for watching. We're about to learn that the Mueller investigation has revealed nothing, found no proof of collusion, and this entire fantasy has now come to an end. After 2.5 years of wasting our time, damn near wasting and ruining a presidency, and having all sorts of negative implications for this administration for the rest of its life. But now we're getting further information about how this whole controversy about so-called Russian collusion started. And it is absolutely sickening. And it's the opposite of what any of us believed and what the narrative was. The narrative, as you'll recall, is that Hillary's campaign hired Fusion GPS, that in turn hired Christopher Steele, a former British intelligence agent, to research the Kremlin's involvement with Donald Trump, and that after extensive research, this highly reputable intel officer came up with a dossier that spelled out chapter and verse the collusion between Russia and Trump. This was then given to Senator John McCain's aide, who gave it to the FBI, and in turn also gave it to the media, and the FBI gave it to the media, and this leaked out and became the basis of the entire investigation that's been going on ever since before Trump's election. This is all completely backwards. Steele, from the testimony, the Nunes Committee, the House Intel Committee, has now gotten sworn testimony covering 80 or 100 hours. It now emerges that Steele did not write the dossier, nor did Fusion. What happened was that Nellie Orr, the wife of Bruce Orr, the number 4 person at the Justice Department, who was on the staff at Fusion GPS, and the head of Fusion GPS, Glenn Simpson, and his wife, all funded by the Hillary campaign, made up a fantasy story of Trump colluding with the Russians. A fantasy story because there were no sources, there was no proof, the allegations were completely fanciful, in the words of Chairman Nunes, quote, made up out of whole cloth, unquote. To give you an idea of how little authenticity there was in these charges, in the course of posting the stuff on the internet in various bits and pieces, some guy logged on and gave an additional element to the story, just in effect, what if this and this were the case? And they took that and they threw it in too. That's in the dossier as well. So this entire thing was conceived in bits and pieces by the people who were paid by the Hillary campaign to put it together. Then once they made this phony document with no pretense of being reality, they needed somebody to put his name on it who would lend it some credibility and give them a chance of getting it out there somehow. So they got a hold of Christopher Steele, a reputable former intelligence agent, and paid him to say that he wrote the dossier. In depositions ever since, Steele has claimed he did not write the dossier, and that is very problematic and troubling given the fact that his name is on it. But apparently he was just paid to put his name on it and to lend his credibility to it, and to use his access to the FBI, Senator McCain's office, and the American media to get that out there in public, where it could become a factor in the presidential election and after the election in undermining and perhaps impeaching the Trump presidency. But it was entirely made up. There was no substance to it at all, and never was any substance. Yet it was this document that was used as the basis for FISA warrants on Carter Page and other members of Trump's campaign team, which would inevitably lead to their conversations with other people in the Trump headquarters. And it was this document leaked to David Kramer of McCain's staff, who then gave it to Comey, and that then made its way from Comey to President Obama, to Donald Trump, and out to the media, so that it was released to the media in December and January as Trump was preparing to take office. This bombshell hit the media, and nobody could believe that it was as fanciful as it turned out to be, and yet then they had to take it seriously. And it then became the basis for repeated news articles confirming these facts and substantiating them, all put out there as part of a conspiracy by FBI agents led by Strzok and Lisa Page, the two lovers who were involved with each other, with the oversight, knowledge, and assistance of Andrew McCabe, who was in charge of counterintelligence, and was put out there as, quote, insurance in the event Trump won the election. And then when he did win the election, as part of an ongoing campaign of sabotaging of Trump to undermine his transition and make it hard as president for him to get off to a running start. This is absolutely breathtaking. It's beyond belief. You know, Eileen and I wrote the book Rogue Spooks, The Intelligence War on Donald Trump. We predicted a lot of this stuff. We said the dossier was phony. We said that it was probably concocted by Steele and Fusion GPS and put out there as a way of destroying the Trump presidency. But nobody could possibly have imagined that this was purely an out-of-whole-cloth creation by operatives of the Hillary Clinton campaign. It amounts really to the dirtiest trick and the biggest hoax that has ever been perpetrated in the history of presidential elections. And it is this hoax, this fraud, that really needs to be investigated. And those who perpetrated it on the American people in the height of an election need to be held responsible for it. I've just written a new book, 50 Shades of Politics, which is unlike anything I've written before. It's a series of 100 short, 2 pages each, autobiographic essays and stories and vignettes and tales from my career in politics, my time with Clinton, my work in 40 countries around the world and in every state in the country. You can't buy it in bookstores, but you can online at Amazon.com. Thanks for watching. Well, my reading has moved on, and so will my history videos. I finished Andrew Roberts' gigantic and fantastic biography of Winston Churchill, Walking with Destiny. And the last 4 or 5 of the videos have been, many of them are focused on Churchill. And now I'm on to his Napoleon biography, an equally long one that he wrote 4 years before, with a completely revisionist view of Napoleon. And he stresses that Napoleon was, in his words, the Enlightenment on horseback. So far, I've only gotten to the early part of his career, particularly after he won the war in Italy, his first major international combat on behalf of the French Revolution. Was still run by the Directory back then, well before he became emperor. But he went throughout Italy replacing nation-states and monarchies with republics, setting up elected legislatures and freedom of media and freedom of the press and freedom of speech, and removing the church from its position of control. And when you look at Napoleon's lasting contributions to human civilization, basically taking the principles of the French Revolution, forgetting about the terror, forgetting about the craziness, and enacting them in France and setting the basis for then spreading them throughout the European continent and the rest of the world, they are enormous. The whole notion of civil marriage or of divorce was basically from the Napoleon period. The idea of civil sacraments of death and birth. Public education is an initiative really from Napoleon's time. The whole Code Napoleon that replaced arbitrary law as the basis of judicial ethics and conduct and fairness throughout the world, of course, came from Napoleon. The metric system came from him. There was an entire range of initiatives that he developed, including the current calendar and the week and all of that stuff, comes from Napoleon's period. And the Enlightenment on horseback, I think that's a marvelous phrase. The American Revolution, of course, preceded the French Revolution by almost 20 years. But very few copied the American Revolution. It was sui generis. The French Revolution was widely copied throughout the world, particularly after the monarchies lost their quadruple alliance that was designed to stop Napoleon's reforms from reaching the whole continent. Particularly after that fell apart around 1860 or 1870. Napoleonic principles and the Republic and all of those elements really spread rapidly throughout the continent. And Napoleon deserves a positive place in history for all that stuff. Now, I'll report to you later when I get further on in the book. It's 1,000 pages long, so it'll take a couple of Saturdays, in which we'll talk about what happened later in his career when he became an emperor and all of that. But early in his career, in the civil peacetime of Napoleon's reign, certainly is incredibly admirable. I've just written a new book, 50 Shades of Politics, which is unlike anything I've written before. It's a series of 100 short, 2 pages each, autobiographic essays and stories and vignettes and tales from my career in politics, my time with Clinton, my work in 40 countries around the world and in every state in the country. You can't buy it in bookstores, but you can online at Amazon.com. Thanks for watching.
Joining us today is noted economist, author, Newsmax columnist, Mr. Ben Stein.
Honored to be here, sir.
It's good to see you. You know, some of you may know Ben because of his iconic role as an economic teacher in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, or from one of his many movie and TV appearances. Many may not be aware that Mr. Stein was a valedictorian at Yale Law School, successful speechwriter for both President Nixon and President Ford. He is a noted economist and financial author. You've seen Ben on Fox News, Fox Business, CNBC, Bloomberg, here on Newsmax TV. His new book, The Capitalist Code, It Can Save Your Life and Make You Very Rich, has just been released. It's already hitting the top of the bestseller lists on Amazon and elsewhere. Ben, thank you very much for joining us.
Honored to be here, sir, of course.
Now, what's fascinating here is in your book, you feel like we have a problem today, that we somehow need to defend or make the case for capitalism. Why is that?
I know, it's incredible. Well, capitalism is under attack by people who are confused, angry, envious, jealous, stupid, and they don't understand what capitalism is. They think it's a system whereby the rich suck the blood of the poor, whereas in fact it's a system whereby any hardworking, industrious, disciplined person who has a head on his shoulders or her shoulders can make a fortune investing in capitalism, the greatest engine for human progress there's ever been.
Well, you know, that may be because if you listen to Elizabeth Warren or you listen to Bernie Sanders enough, the case for free markets is questioned continuously in what they have to say.
I know, because Elizabeth Warren, I want to say something first nice about Elizabeth Warren. Many months ago, I saw her walking through the Washington, D.C. National Airport, Reagan Airport, and she was carrying her own bags. She didn't have a porter. She didn't have Secret Service. She just was walking through there like she could have been anybody. And I said to her, you know, this is the most impressive thing I've ever seen about you. But other than that, she's a complete fool. And she makes a fool of herself whenever she talks about capitalism. She says, corporations don't cry, corporations don't shed tears, corporations don't laugh, corporations don't have feelings, corporations are not like human beings. But corporations are aggregations of human beings who make things, make services, who provide a tremendous, overwhelming cornucopia of everything good in the United States and of America, and their employees are just as much human as the employees of her office, which is paid for, of course, by the taxpayers. The customers of corporations are just as human as the customers of any Bolshevik state-supported stores. She is completely wrong about that. The corporation is just a very efficient way of aggregating human effort and human discipline to produce solutions to mankind's wants and needs.
Why is it, do you think, then, that she and Bernie, who's an avowed socialist, push this? When you look at the world, this history of socialism includes a list of failed countries.
It's all failed countries, and the only one that's a big, giant success is China, which has largely made itself into a capitalist country, and that's a giant super success. Yeah. Societies that thrive are the capitalist societies. It's almost impossible to find a capitalist country that is not a successful, thriving country, whereas it's almost impossible, and it's pretty much impossible, to find a socialist or communist country that is a success. Mankind wants to have his or her needs addressed, and capitalism does that much, much better than communism or socialism, and it does it with freedom. It does it by letting people do what they want to do, what they need to do, what their spirit tells them to do, instead of doing what the state orders them to do. And that has produced incredibly, unbelievably good results. I mean, look at you. Here you and I are. We're sitting here in our nice suits. Well, your suit is much nicer than mine, but we're sitting in our nice suits in this nice air-conditioned studio.
Right.
Outside is a big city, New York City. Somehow, without the state intervening, we have all the hot dogs we want. We have all the pizza we want. We have all the fresh fish we want. We have all the hamburgers we want. And the state is not compelling people to do any of it. It's done by human beings fulfilling their own wants and needs. And that is how capitalism works. And then in so doing, it throws off income. Now, here's the key part of the book.
Right.
It throws off income. Now, where does the income go? It goes to the owners of the corporation or the company that is doing the production of the supplies of goods and services. And where does that go? It goes into their savings, and they can then buy more and more and more of the investment good. And then eventually they can retire, and it will pay for their retirement, pay for them to live in comfort for the rest of their lives. That's a giant super thing. That's a giant, unbelievable super thing.
You know, people, when you look at their savings, they only have saved about 20%.
Oh, people are
they're
not
gonna
saving
need.
enough. People are not saving enough, but they've got to learn to save more. And it's interesting. I see all these stories on TV about the tax code is going to change this, tax code is going to change that. Well, what will change Americans' lives more than anything is if Americans would save more, if Americans would spend less and save more, and they would put that savings to work in a very productive way, which is to say in the stock market. The stock market is a magical mystery tour to a land of promise and success and material comfort. And it's free. It's not totally free, but it's free of political pressure. It's free in terms of commissions, almost. It's almost no commission nowadays. And it provides people with an opportunity to hitch their wagons to the incredibly powerful capitalist train. I mean, imagine capitalism is like a roaring locomotive of a roaring freight train pulling down the track, and it's zooming along, and you can hitch your wagon to it for a few dollars each month, and it will pull you along, and add a few more dollars, it'll pull you along, and eventually you'll have your own railroad carriage, and eventually you will be providing enough income for your children and your children's children and their children to live comfortably for the rest of their lives and for the rest of mankind's future.
I'm going to take a quick break here. We'll have more Ben Stein when we return right after this. We'll continue with Ben Stein, the famous economist and financial advisor. He's out with his new best-selling book, The Capitalist Code. It can save your life and make you very rich. Ben's revealing why he wrote this important book and why he thinks every American should prepare for their financial future, whether in their 20s, in their 50s, or getting ready to retire, or even people who've already retired. The Capitalist Code is a guidebook for you to understand how wealth is made and how you can make it yourself. Ben Stein gives some very strong practical advice on how to live your life, spend money, save, and invest so that you can become really rich. Warren Buffett, billionaire investor, rarely endorses books, but he has said, and I quote, "My friend Ben Stein has written a short book that tells you everything you need to know about investing and in words you can understand. Follow Ben's advice and you will do far better than almost all investors, and I include pension funds, universities, and the super rich who pay high fees to advisors." That's from Warren Buffett. The Capitalist Code is available online at outlets like Amazon and bookstores everywhere, but you can check out the free offer for this book with the Franklin Prosperity Report, America's #1 guide to saving money and growing your wealth. The editors at Franklin Prosperity Report are willing to give you Ben's book, Capitalist Code, for free. That's a $25 value, including shipping. Just go to the website listed or call the 800 number on the screen today. And welcome back. Ben, in that break, we mentioned that Warren Buffett, who rarely endorses a book, in fact, I can't remember him endorsing a book, as a matter of fact, gives you a really warm endorsement.
Well, he's my friend, for one thing. I mean, we're friends, so that helps a lot. But also, I am his biggest fan, and we've been corresponding now for years, maybe decades, about his investment ideas and insights. And I think he knows that I have largely cadged what I wrote from him. I mean, if you were to say, well, where do Ben Stein's ideas come from? The greatest majority of them come from Warren E. Buffett, the greatest investor the world has ever known. and he explains it very well, that when you're buying a stock, you are not buying an entry on a computer screen. You are buying a piece of a business. And that is what is so crucial about buying stock. When you buy enough pieces of stock, it's a sense as if you owned a business.
Right.
Now, we'd all like to own a Cadillac dealership or a Buick dealership or a Rolls-Royce dealership or a corn farm or a hog farm. We'd all like to own any of these things, but we can't. It's not easy for us to do it. You can't just leave your job as a computer keyboard operator or whatever they do, and I don't know much about computers, and go start a farm.
Right.
But you can buy stock in one, and that makes you the owner of a business just by investing small sums of money, month by month, year in, year out, decade in, decade out. Eventually, we become the owners of a small business. Not an actual small business itself where it'll say Ben Stein Incorporated on the door, but a business where it will say General Motors on the door, General...
You're in essence becoming a partner.
You're becoming a partner, exactly. Buffett used to write to us stockholders every year, I don't look upon you as investors, I look upon you as partners. Right. I was too stupid to realize that he meant it seriously, and I didn't buy enough stock in it. I should have done that. But I make a great many mistakes. So so what we do when we become stockholders is we own a business. We own a business that is going to throw off income. It's going to throw off dividends or else capital gains for all eternity, and it's going to help our children and our grandchildren for their whole lives.
Well, this goes to a fundamental philosophy. You share it with Warren. You've made reference to it, as a matter of fact. You believe that when you buy a company, you should hold on to that company. You're not a trader. You're not a day trader in terms of your philosophy.
I don't trade at all. Warren Buffett said years ago, our preferred holding period is forever. And my preferred holding period is forever. I mean, I'm old now. I mean, I'm not going to kid you. I'm old. I'm 72 years old, and I'm getting older every hour of every day, every minute of every day. And I'm little by little spending it. I spend a large part of it transferring it to my son and my granddaughter and my daughter-in-law. But I spend a lot of it, and little by little I will run out of it. But by the time I've run out of it, I hope I will be dead, and also I will hope that my son will by that time have quite a substantial nest egg, so that he can go on and carry on and do the same thing with his daughter and her children and so forth. So that's... But I want to emphasize, when you buy a stock, you are not just buying a number flashing across the computer screen.
Right.
You are buying a piece of a company, and it's the same as if you owned a piece of the company, and as you own that company, little by little, you acquire more of the company, you acquire more earnings from the company, and then you buy another company, and you buy another company, and another company, and altogether, you buy the index, what's called the index of stocks. You don't try to pick stocks. You do not try to pick individual stocks. Never, never, never do I try to pick individual stocks except for Berkshire Hathaway. And you pick these stocks, and you watch them grow, multiply, subdivide, add to themselves like a giant animal from outer space. Think of capitalism as a giant animal from outer space that came down and start eating up the earth. Only you can become part of it. It says to you, Ben Stein, you can become part of us giant animals from outer space, or else you can just be a wage slave working away in a slave salt mine for the rest of your life.
Well, you know, the market, as we're doing this interview, the market is above 23,000. I think there are a lot of people who are but they're worried. They're worried that, oh my God, it is at a level that's not sustainable.
At a level which I don't think it's too high.
You can't time it.
It's my opinion. You can time it over decades. You can't time it over months or weeks. But you can. But over long periods of time, you almost always turn out to be right to buy it. So when it goes down, just buy more, because it's essentially offering you the same product at a lower price. It's like having Brooks Brothers shirts go on sale at a certain price, and then a week later they're on sale for a quarter or less.
I know you touch on this in the book, but how important is it that you have a plan for your money?
It's very important that you have a plan, but the plan doesn't have to be anything particularly complicated. The plan should just be to add to your savings every month or every week, if you or bi-weekly, or however often you get paid.
Right.
Just make sure that you are taking money out of current consumption and putting it in saving. Warren Buffett says, don't worry about how much you spend. Worry about how much you save. Do your saving first, and then whatever's left, spend that. Most people would say, do your spending first, and whatever's left, save that. He says, do your saving first, and whatever's left, spend that.
I'm going to pick up on that in just a minute. We're going to be back with more with Ben Stein in just one moment. I want to pick up on what you were just talking about. Do you have to be 20 when you do this? I mean,
no, absolutely not.
Is there a point, I guess, at which you're too old to do this? Say you're 60-something years old. Is it too old then?
No, it's never too old to save. You will not get the benefits of saving over long periods of time that you would get if you started younger. And I'm glad you raised this point, because it is so important to start young. I was so blessed. When I was a young man in my small town outside Washington, D.C., which was Silver Spring, Maryland, which is now a huge, booming suburb, and used to be a small town. Anyway, the only building in town that had good, consistent air conditioning was our local savings and loan. And I would go in there and I would say, put in my pennies, a penny counting machine,
right,
and I would deposit them. And if it had not been for that air conditioner, I probably would not have saved the money. But I started saving at a very early age. I didn't save anywhere near as much as I should have or could have, but it was incredibly useful for me to do. And I wish I'd done much more of it. But once you start saving, don't just sock it away in a bank account. Put it in the stock market. Yes, there will be ups and downs, and some of the downs will be vicious. Some of them will be cruel, and they'll keep you up at night, and they'll make you want to throw up and tear your hair out and shoot yourself. But stay in it and keep buying more, and little by little the market will turn around, and then it will go to new highs, and you'll be so glad you bought when you did. You know, it's interesting. I look through my stock market statements and my brokerage statements, and they go on for page after page after page after page. But mostly the same thing, mostly index funds of various kinds.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that, because it's interesting. You say you don't believe in individual stocks except for Berkshire Hathaway. But Berkshire Hathaway, I would argue, is an index, because it is a collection of actually a lot of companies.
It's not a very large collection. Buffett says that the idea is to put all your money in just a few eggs and watch those eggs very closely. He's shifted a bit now, and he has quite a few more eggs. Now, at this point, Buffett says you can't really expect to beat the indexes, and he doesn't expect to beat them with his own company. He does, but he doesn't expect to do it for much longer.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. I know in my own personal investing experience, even in years when I think I've done rather well, when I compare it against the index, most of the time that index has done better.
People say to me all the time, Bengula, that's Yiddish for Benji. Bengula, how can you just buy the index that's just giving you average performance? No, it's giving you way above average performance. Buying the index keeps you way ahead of the average, and it's a miracle way of buying stocks. Now, more and more people are doing it, so that the market for stock pickers is falling away very quickly. But buy the index. The index will outperform the market and hand-chosen stocks almost every time. Why? Because we can't predict the future. Man cannot predict the future. All we know, well, we can predict it, but it won't be right. We can predict anything we want, but it won't be right. But man is able to buy the whole index, buy the whole shopping center, buy the whole grocery store, and eventually some of those things will go up so much that they'll pull up the value of everything else. That's what you want to do. Buy the whole store.
Ben, it's been a great pleasure visiting with you today.
It's been a great pleasure visiting with you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Well,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you, sir.
Thank you.
Buy your stock. Do it now.
Exactly. Buy the stock.
Audience out there, buy stock, buy in the indexes, but right now, and don't sell it. Just pass it on to your grandchildren and your children.